Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Shit You Wish Your Building Did, a podcast where we take an unvarnished look at the technology in our buildings, the good and the bad. In this episode, I'm talking to Daniel Wroclawski, a journalist at Consumer Reports in the US, who writes about smart home technology. And we take a deep dive into the state of the smart home market. Are big tech companies just trying to shoehorn more tech into our homes, or is the marketing hype actually about to live up to the reality? If you like the episode, there's a button specifically for that down below. Please click it. So let's jump right in. Okay, Dan from Consumer Reports, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for sparing the time. You are a consumer expert on smart home. Can I call you a journalist or writer?
Yeah, I am a journalist. Yeah,
perfect.
Smart home journalist. Yeah.
A good place to start, I think, would be like an overview from you of like where do you feel like the state of smart home technology is at the moment?
Sure. I honestly feel it's a bit of a mess right now. I've been covering this space for 10 years now, and we're still kind of dealing with the same problems that we've had 10 years ago, mainly interoperability and these companies just not playing nicely and letting everything talk to each other. I think there is some hope on the horizon with the Matter Smart Home Standard, assuming everyone adopts it fully. But that's still a little bit of work in progress, so they are making progress, which is good. But right now, it's still tricky and can be tough for consumers.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned as well, you've been tracking the market for around 10 years, right?
Yes. Yep.
And, it reminded me the other day, I was looking back at some old articles that it was like just about over 10 years since Google acquired Nest, which at the time seemed like a massive deal, right?
It definitely was.
Yeah. And then I think, I just feel like since then we've seen some pretty successful companies, right, in terms of like how they've developed. I'm thinking Ring, for example, very popular one. So I mean, how would you typify that? Like, so it seems like we've had these sort of companies that have made some traction, but it's almost like they're very siloed. They do one thing, and then they don't play with everything else.
Yeah, so all of these companies have had a lot of success just in singular products. They develop a really compelling product, really good branding, really good marketing, and consumers are getting the benefit of these individual products, whether it's a Nest thermostat or a Ring doorbell or an Arlo security camera. These are things that are resonating with people and they like them. But consumers aren't really getting the smart of the smart home, if you will. And that really comes from automation and getting all of these things to play nicely together. If it's dark out and your Ring doorbell detects motion, it'd be nice if it would, turn your lights on so it looks like someone's home if you're not, or something like that. And while that is possible today, if you're not, a nerd like me, it's going to be tricky for you to set up. You're going to need, a bunch of other products. You're going to need other apps, not just the Ring app. And it's just not simple for people. And I think we will get there one day. I don't think that'll be next year, but maybe in like the next 5 years. But yeah, it's been tough to get to this place of really encompassing the whole home in the smart home.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a bit of an unfair comparison, right? But Tesla, other companies are talking about self-driving cars. That's happening. Right? Like there are Waymo taxis out there self-driving, but yet we can't get, as you said, a Ring doorbell to talk to like a lighting, maybe like Philips Hue or whatever, right? So, I mean, what is going on there? Like, why is it that um, that sort of expectation, or what we would consider to be a fairly trivial problem to solve, like not being solved, and what's going on right behind the scenes that people can't see?
So for the longest time, I would say it wasn't being solved because these companies like data, and they get money from collecting all this data. And when you allow products to talk to each other, you are relinquishing some control over that data. You're also relinquishing sales of your own potentially competing products. If uh, say Ring actually does make a smart light bulb. It is not trivial to set up, but if they let you play with, say, Philips Hue or LifeX or Wiz, they are in theory losing out on a sale of their own smart light bulb. So there's just a lot of competing priorities is probably a nice way to put it. But just there's this really at the end of the day comes down to money.
Mm.
I think what has changed in the last 5 years, and it's actually been 5 years since the big companies all got together and announced that they were creating the Matter standard, is they realized that by not solving this problem, they're actually leaving a lot more money on the table.
Mm.
Because in theory, once you solve this problem, you actually enable a lot more a lot more things to be built on top of it. So services, whether like the big one that everyone is focused on right now is home energy management,
Mm.
especially as more people adopt solar and battery backup systems and generators and those kinds of things. The theory is that there will be a lot of money to be made in home energy management services that you could layer on top of these things. But in order to get there, everything has to work together. No one's going to necessarily buy, one brand of solar panels and battery backups and an EV and appliances and, you name it. It's just not going to happen. So you have to solve this problem, and they are finally getting there. The big players in smart home, Apple, Google, Samsung, Amazon, LG, even, uh, they are adopting Matter. They are, building it into their products. It's taken a lot longer, I think, than everyone hoped it would.
Mm.
But standards are hard. They're messy and they take a long time. We take Wi-Fi and Bluetooth for granted today, but
True.
those were very novel and difficult things to create, like 20 years ago. So um, I think we will get there. It's just taking a lot longer than people want it to, and I think even than these companies expected it would.
Right. So yeah, okay. You mentioned Matter, and I didn't realize it'd been 5 years. So, I mean, is that going to be? I guess in a way like a line in the sand. Like everything after that will be compatible, but what about all the stuff they've already sold? Like, is that are we just going to have to forget about that?
Yeah, it's tough. Initially when they announced it, they made all these promises that their Matter allows for bridging of older products into a Matter setup. And while that's true, it just hasn't really been adopted much because there's just not really much of an incentive. They'll make more money if you go out and buy the new thing instead of releasing a software update or some kind of plug-in adapter for the old thing. Where you're actually seeing this now being solved is actually in the open source community. If you're familiar with Home Assistant, that's kind of the big open source smart home system. They are allowing, they're not allowing people, since it's open source, you can build whatever you want for it. People are building bridges for Matter so that you could, connect all of your old stuff to Home Assistant, for example. And there are like thousands of integrations for all sorts of random and even products that the manufacturers have since gone out of business. There's all these integrations for them for Home Assistant, so you can easily bring them in, and then you can add Matter bridging and bridge them into a setup with all these other Matter devices.
Okay,
But
that's pretty cool.
again, that's open source, and it's not easy for the average consumer to use that. You got to be a really kind of techie person and be comfortable with setting up a Raspberry Pi and all these things. So it is unfortunate because for the majority of consumers, they're kind of being left behind with this old stuff that they don't really want to get rid of and shouldn't have to.
Yeah. But I suppose in that regard, they would probably just say it's, well, you change your phone every 2 to 3 years. There's some expectation that you're going to change your Ring doorbell.
There is it. Yeah. And I think it's the problem with home products in particular is it's usually quite a bit longer than, electronics like smartphones or laptops or tablets. The small stuff, yeah, it's much easier to change, but the big stuff, your appliances, and which there are now lots of smart appliances. We actually, Consumer Reports does its own surveys in the US at least. About 20% of Americans own at least one smart large appliance, so refrigerator, washer, oven, dishwasher, you name it.
Okay.
And those products are being left behind, and people aren't going to replace them just to get that smart functionality, because frankly, and this is another topic we could dive into, but frankly, the smart features of large appliances just aren't that compelling on their own. But
that's exactly what I was going to kind of say, right? Because I would be in that category. We have a washing machine that has an app, Samsung. But it's just like, how do you actually, what is smart and what isn't smart, right? Because like, whilst like I can, for example, choose programs, so I can program like a specific wash on this thing, like that's pretty much all I can do. And even then, it doesn't allow me to like remotely control the washing machine, which I guess for good reason, right? Maybe I don't want that being hacked and someone else to be able to turn it off and on. But that also means that I'm stood by the washing machine with the app open, programming it, and then sending it to the machine. But like, I mean, what's the point? I could just be pressing a button on it.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head. With appliances in particular, the smart functionality, and I actually just wrote about this week, it's really not compelling for most consumers. That same survey we did found that while 20% of Americans own a smart large appliance, only 7% actually use the smart features of the appliance. And I think that just goes to show that it's really not compelling for people. It's funny, actually almost a decade ago, I'd say maybe more like 7 or 8 years, all these big manufacturers were very gung-ho about smart appliances and adding Wi-Fi and smarts to everything. And they did that, but they essentially did it without really knowing what to do with it. So all these appliances are out there and they have Wi-Fi connectivity and whatnot, but they never really added any sort of compelling features. Like my own personal example, I own an LG smart refrigerator, and it is only smart in that I can, from my phone, change the temperature settings of it.
Okay.
The one useful thing it could do for me is tell me if my 5-year-old leaves the refrigerator door open. And it collects data on every time I open and close the refrigerator doors and sends that back to LG. But it can't tell me when the door has been left open and send me an alert. It has the data to do so, but it won't do it. And that's just a failing on LG's part. They could have built that feature and they chose not to.
Yeah, and it feels like maybe in that scenario, like the mindset for them is, well, we're the prioritizing getting the data, getting your data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly feels like in a lot of appliances, I mean, we've got to make the differentiation, right, between different types of smart home technology, but certainly with the appliances, it feels like a lot of it is just they've shoehorned technology into it without really thinking about, okay, well, what are the use cases? What's really going to improve the experience?
Yeah, and that's why you're seeing consumers see a lot more value in the small, like, gadgets, if you will, the smart thermostats, the doorbells, the lights, the plugs, because they're just, frankly, those companies, I think, have done a better job of communicating the value, and the appliance makers really have not.
What is the most sort of widely adopted smart home piece of technology? Do you know?
It I see so many different surveys on these things, and I feel like it changes all the time. The big one seems to be lighting, so smart light bulbs, switches, plugs, those kinds of things. And then robot vacuums is another big one.
Yeah, of course.
And then security products, so cameras, doorbells, alarm systems, those kinds of things tend to be what's at the top. And it changes a lot, but those are usually the big ones.
Yeah, certainly. I have hardly any kind of smart home devices, but apart from, like I said, mention some appliances, but I definitely see more where, people in the neighborhood is like things like the grass, the vacuum cleaner and stuff. I know that they're really popular. Yeah, I think it's like on the security definitely seemed like it was something that was one of the early things that people adopted, and the use case there.
It's like a no-brainer. The value proposition there is very clear. You feel safe in your own home. I personally had an attempted burglary in my home about a little over a year ago, and so I got a lot of value out of my home security system. But outside of that, it's been hard for the value proposition to become clear. Everyone seems to think the next big one is energy management, because everyone wants to save money on their electric bill or their heating and cooling bills. Beyond that, I think it's unclear. I think there's some hope that AI will reveal some of these things. We are starting to see AI, and specifically this new form of AI, the large language models, applied to smart home tech. But it's still very early days for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because it wasn't so long ago, maybe like a month, where Tesla was showing off the robot. I can't remember what they're calling it now.
Optimus. Yeah.
I think that's kind of, I thought it was fascinating, right? Like, because he was talking about these different applications, and a lot of them were to do with smart home, right? Like, okay, this thing's going to cook, this thing's going to do the washing up, whatever. And I suppose in some respects that is kind of integration, right? Isn't it? Because it's like security and cleaning and all of these things. So I wonder if actually that's what ends up being the integration piece, is the more robotics.
No, I think you're right. I mean, going back to what we said about appliances, the big thing that would make appliances compelling is if your dishwasher could load and unload itself, or your washing machine could transfer the clothes to the dryer, and of course that isn't really possible, but a robot could do that for you if we can get to that point. I've seen so many robot concepts over the last 10 years that have never really gone beyond the demo stage. But I do think we are getting there, and I think that these new advances in AI will help us get there. But I'm still kind of like, I'll believe it when I see it. But that is the end goal.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Something we haven't touched on, I think it's super important. We did the last podcast we did was about this cybersecurity, right? I always see, like, most technology is a trade-off, right? You're getting some benefit, and based on like some negative, right? You've got to weigh that up. Do you think the current benefits of smart home tech as it is now like outweighs the negative of the fact that you basically are increasing your cyber risk?
I think it depends who you ask. For me, no, but I'm not the norm. I would say for the average consumer, the benefits don't outweigh the risks. We do our own cybersecurity testing of connected products and find many security vulnerabilities. We report back to the companies, which is good because they'll generally fix them.
Sure.
But yeah, there's when you connect any of these things, you just open yourself up to risk. I think the only sort of fix for that on the horizon is more sort of local control, which is where a lot of the smart home is moving. So just things staying within the home and not being broadcasted outside the home. That does provide you some protection there. But again, companies have to be willing to make that trade-off, and if they do that, they're losing out on data that they can collect on you. So competing priorities. But it's a risk that you just sort of have to be willing to accept. And of course, there are things you can do, to protect yourself. In terms of locking down your network, you can set up a secondary network and just put all your IoT stuff on that, and that sort of insulates that stuff from your more personal devices like laptops and phones. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just a risk you have to take.
Okay. Well, some good advice there. You mentioned you do your own testing. I mean, without naming names, but like, is there some really egregious stuff that you see?
So I don't personally do it. We have a whole
Okay.
team of engineers who do the testing. But yeah, I basically report on what they find. Some of the most egregious stuff, I would say, at least in terms of brands that I can talk about, I would say one of the biggest in the last couple of years was Eufy, which is a security home security brand. They just did not have very good cybersecurity practices. There was, I think it was almost 2 years ago now, there was a big sort of scandal where a bunch of camera feeds were being broadcasted, unencrypted over the web, and people could access them and see other people's camera feeds and whatnot. It was not good, and they had to make a lot of changes, which they did, and credit to them. They've improved a lot since then, but that was one of the worst in recent memory, I'd say. But we see all sorts of random things. We recently, I don't know the brand, and I don't think I could disclose it either, but a robot vacuum that was essentially just very easy to hack and take control of. And that can be problematic because a lot of them have cameras, so someone could hack into them and basically spy on you. So yeah, there's a lot of things we see. A lot of them aren't generally that exciting. It's like,
Sure, yeah,
this traffic's being broadcasted unencrypted, like you should encrypt it. But every now and then you get something that's kind of surprising.
Yeah. It's but I appreciate that. I think it's a very like honest and open perspective there, because I think that unfortunately, because it's not and obviously companies are not going to market like this, and I'm not saying they hide things, but obviously they're not going to focus on issues with cybersecurity. So I think some of the time it's not considered enough when people are making that consumer decision about what to buy, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I mean, in general, like as a consumer journalist, is there, do you have specific advice, general advice for people about what to invest into in smart home? Like, I think, for example, if there was just one system, you would say, okay, you don't have any smart home, this is the kind of thing that I think would, provide the best experience, best return on investment for you as an individual.
Yeah, it's tough. I wouldn't say there's one system per se, but I mean, this probably doesn't seem like the most interesting advice, but honestly, just go with a name brand. Don't buy some obscure product that is either on Amazon or where have you. I refer to them as alphabet soup brands, where it's just like a scramble of letters that don't really form any real words. Don't buy that stuff. A lot of people do, and it almost always is very insecure and easy to hack.
Yeah.
So just stay away from that stuff. If you can go for things that are controlled locally, all Matter devices, which they have the Matter logo on the packaging, so it's very easy to identify.
Okay.
All Matter devices can be controlled locally, which automatically sort of sets you up for just some improved security there. Apple Home is a really good solution. Anything that works with that, because it's all encrypted very well and done locally. You need to have an Apple Hub in your home that's like a HomePod or an Apple TV. But having that, it just puts you in a much more secure position.
Yeah. I guess there's definitely one area of consumer electronics where it really doesn't pay to go for the cheap option, right?
Really does not.
No,
it really does not.
Cool. Look, Dan, really appreciate you taking the time. I think there's some great advice there for people, and let's see what happens, right? Next few years about whether Matter actually brings more integration and whether these things are gonna we can see new use cases being brought about by better interoperability.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, and at the very least, it'll be interesting to watch.
So I'll ask you one final question. Is there one takeaway, one thing you want people to to really consider from this conversation?
I would say, if you are interested in the smart home, by all means, it's worth dabbling in a little bit, but really just think about what you want to get out of it. Don't just buy something for the novelty of it. Really think about what it could actually improve for you or a problem it could solve for you, and start there. And I think you'll get a lot more satisfaction out of it.
Yeah, good advice. And thanks again.
Really thank you for having
conversation. Me. If anyone's interested in reading your work, you publish it on the website, right?
Yeah, just go to consumerreports.org. You can also search my name and you'll find just about everything. So
great. Are you on socials? Social media?
Yes. So yes, I am. So my handle, depending on where you go, it's either at the Smart Home Guy or at Dan WROC.
Great.
But I'm on Threads, X, Mastodon, Blue Sky, Instagram, just about everywhere.
Okay, nice. And everyone, thanks for listening. If you got this far, I'm guessing you thought it was a decent conversation. So if you did get this far, click the like button, subscribe, and that would really help us out. Thanks again. Appreciate everyone for listening. Bye for now.